At a time when the coronavirus is showing its true colors by spreading rapidly across the nation, we came across an interesting question. What color is the coronavirus? If you did a Google image search for pictures of the coronavirus, you will get many pictures of the virus in various different colors. So what is the actual color of the virus? Or do they come in different colors like gems? Welcome to Pale Blue Thoughts. To answer the seemingly easy question, we need to answer three separate questions first. How do we see things? What determines the color of what we see? And three, what all can we see? When light gets reflected from an object, it enters our eyes where it gets focused by the lens onto the retina. This gets converted to signals which get sent to the brain, which gives us the sensation called as vision. The second question, what determines the color of something that we see? You know that white light is composed of many different wavelengths of light. Some which we can see, some which we can't see. When these waves reach our eyes, our brains can distinguish some of these wavelengths as a combination of three primary colors, and that determines the colors of the objects that we see around us. We have already discussed this in one of our recent videos where we showed why a red apple is not intrinsically red. We had also asked our viewers a question, what color would a red apple appear under red light, and asked you to answer it. We did not get a single response. Anyways, moving on to the next question. What is the limit of our vision? That actually depends on two factors of light. One of them, the size of the lens, can be overcome using a microscope. A microscope enlarges a very small object so that we can see it. How do they work? One factor which determines the effectiveness of microscopes is the amount of light that a microscopic particle reflects. Also, the contrast or the amount of light that an object reflects compared to the surroundings also determines our ability to see the object. If the amount of light reflected by an object is less, then it won't be able to stimulate the receptors in your eyes and you won't be able to see the object. And what limits our vision? You know that any object will reflect light in all directions. Well, the lens within our eyes is a small hole of about 10 millimeters and it cannot capture all the light that is reflected from the objects. So we use a larger lens in a microscope which gathers or collects more light from smaller objects and helps us to see them. The second limit of our vision is called the limit of resolution. This is due to the wavelength nature of light. You know that all waves have a tendency to bend around obstacles. You have seen it in rivers and ponds and other water bodies where waves of water easily passes around or above an obstacle like a rock. Light too behaves in a similar fashion. However, the ability of waves to move around an object is determined by the size of the obstacle. If the comparative size of the wave and the obstacle are similar, then the wave can pass around the obstacle. Else it can't. The wavelength of light is in nanometers. Hence, light cannot travel around many obstacles that we see around us. Sound, on the other hand, has its wavelength in meters. So, it can bend around obstacles. How do we know this? Well, think about someone making a speech inside a hall. You are standing outside. If you're not at the door, you won't be able to see the speaker. Why? Because light doesn't bend around the obstacle. Because the light doesn't bend around the obstacle, that is the building walls. But you can hear the speaker. That is because sound can bend over the same obstacle. Why? Because it has a bigger wavelength and is comparable to the size of the walls. This feature of comparable sizes gets interesting when it comes to light and extremely minute objects whose size are less than nanometers. The coronavirus is one such object. It has an average size of 60 to 140 nanometers. Compare this with the wavelength of visible light, which is between 380 to 750 nanometers. Since the wavelength of light is more than that of the virus, the light will just bend around it with ease and won't get reflected off it. And since there is no reflected light, we won't be able to see the virus as the light obscures the virus. And since there is no reflected light, microscopes would be ineffective as microscopes work using reflected light and enhances our vision. That is why normal microscopes are not able to detect viruses but can see bigger organisms like bacteria. Here is where science has developed an electron microscope. So how does an electron microscope overcome this limitation of light? Electrons, like light, have a wave nature in their movement. So we can focus electrons just the way we can focus light. Although the wavelength varies according to the voltage applied to the electrons, at around 200 kilovolts, the wavelength of an electron is just 0.0027 nanometers, much smaller than light. So how does this help us? Since the wavelength of an electron is similar than the virus, it cannot bend around the virus and it gets reflected off it. So the resolution of the image gets better as we would be able to focus the electron beams reflected off the virus. This enables us to get a picture of the virus with a better resolution. But there is a problem. When you use electrons in an electron microscope, we can only measure the strength of the beams that get scattered or reflected from the virus. We cannot measure the wavelength from different areas of the virus like we do with light. Where does that leave us? Since we can only measure the strength and not the difference in wavelengths using an electron microscope, we cannot get a color image using an electron microscope. It will be black and white for bright and dull areas. So what about the colors that we saw on the Google images? That is called as pseudo coloring. The monochromatic or black and white images that we obtain from an electron microscope is colored artificially, either to enhance the look of the picture or colored differently to enable us to understand the subtle differences in their structure. So it is us who add colors to the virus from the black and white images obtained from an electron microscope. Talk about applying makeup to the virus to make it look good. So the answer to the question we asked at the beginning, well, as of now, we have no way to know the color of the coronavirus using any techniques that we have currently. But looking at the way the virus is spreading and the havoc it is creating, black, the color usually attributed to death, might be the most suitable. So don't get the virus inside if you can help it. Wear a mask, maintain social distancing, and wash your hands frequently. And do take the vaccine when it is available. We will be back with another interesting video soon. Till then, it's bye-bye from Pale Blue Thoughts.